Hi, I'm Russ from Escape Design Studios, and I wanted to discuss the molding procedure with you. We've already talked about making a cradle for the mold, for your sculpture, and what that does is it kind of supports your sculpture, especially large sculptures, and keeps it from, compressing the clay and essentially damaging your texture and all of your hard work. But even before that, you should essentially plan out the entire design of your mold even sometimes before you start sculpting. I have a few photos that I'm gonna post in this video that are gonna show you how we took the sculpture and essentially we found a line that or several lines that indicated the best possible route to take to make this three-part mold. With a two-piece mold, it's usually predetermined that you just go up around the ears, across the crest of the head, and that's pretty much it. Down the shoulders, and then it pries wide, pries open on a plane. So that's the beauty of a two-piece mold, and that's the simplicity of a two-piece mold to a certain extent. When you get into more complicated mold making, like three-piece molds, you definitely want to design in mind. Sometimes before you, like I said, before you start sculpting, the main problem that we had was, we had to secure these ears. I didn't want to take them off. A lot of times you'll find that mask makers will actually remove things like that and create like a crease in the sculpture so that it looks like it fits in, and so when you put the ears on the finished product, that it looks natural, and there's nothing wrong with that. In my case, those creases didn't look natural, and I didn't want to remove the ears, so I had to create that cradle, knowing I had to create that cradle to support the back of the sculpture, including the ears. And then I was able to draw out the lines from there. So design is of the utmost importance to your mold making, and you should definitely look at your sculpture, take some photos of it, which you're probably going to do anyway, and on the computer, maybe draw some hash marks to give you an idea of where those lines need to be. Now, we have the three-part mold, so as you can see in these pictures, we've labeled those areas 1, 2, and 3. Obviously, the head, the chest plate, and the back. We have essentially the case lines, and the case lines are where those two parts of the mold actually meet, that plane that they actually compress on. You want them to be smooth, and you want them to be as flat as possible. So what you're going to do is you're going to design this out, you're going to draw it out, and then you're going to figure out how do these parts actually pull together. So as you can see in this particular drawing, we have arrows indicating how that mold is going to pull apart and in what sequence. And a lot of that has to do with the number sequence that we use, the 1, 2, and 3. So essentially the first part of the mold that would come off would be the head casing. So there's pry marks indicated, there is, it's going to come off the main portion from the other two plates. But once that portion is removed, then the other two parts of the mold are actually just a two-part mold that pops apart easily. So they go out in 180 degrees from each other. So design is extremely important, and I hope that we were able to show you a little bit about, through these drawings, how we designed ours. And every sculpture is going to be different, so certainly take that into consideration. Okay, so this is a simple example of, it's a really simple example, almost to the point of ridiculous, of what an actual undercut is. No one is going to just look at a ball and not know where the center line is. So you're definitely going to be figuring that out while you're working. And if you imagine that this is the plaster mold, and this is your case line, and put that there, your case line, then you can determine, you know, that that this is obviously going to lock this ball into place. This would be a more extreme example, okay, of locking it in place, because it actually starts to cup around the ball and you can't actually get it to pop out of the mold. So, and if that was a rigid part, you're really, really in trouble, okay? So if you look down here, this is a less extreme example, but it essentially gives you the same issue. You're above the equator, and you've locked in. As that ball starts tapering down from its equator, from its widest point, you've now kind of locked it in. You're still going to have a difficult time getting it out of there, and essentially you're going to end up breaking this piece off and causing a huge problem. You know, you're going to end up having to repair it, and your mold is going to be weak from the very get-go. Okay, so you want to keep the case lines on the equator to make sure that it pops out of the mold okay. What we did for the werewolf sculpture was create an armature that could be destroyed in case I didn't plan out the mold quite to the extent that I had assumed that I had. So where undercuts were concerned, I had a backup plan. When we're talking about the cast, in other words your latex mask that you're going to pull from that mold, you're not really going to have a major concern with undercuts. It's essentially a collapsible part. You know, it's a latex mask. They fold up, and you essentially just pack them into a ball, and they come right back to where, you know, you wanted them. When you're talking about undercuts in that particular case, you know, is not as much of a concern. Your main concern is going to be pulling your sculpture out. Like I said, we created that collapsible armature to get ours out if necessary. But also, there was so much clay involved in that sculpture that essentially we had almost 2 inches of clay buildup around the armature itself so that we could actually pull it apart, because the clay is definitely going to give. And in the temperatures that we had in the studio that particular week, you know, and having the AC break down on us, the warmer the clay was, the better. Undercuts and how they pertain to your sculpture should be something in the back of your mind, and should always be in the back of your mind anytime you're making a mold. It would be a good idea, if you're a first-time mold maker, to practice on something like a ball, like a racket ball or something to that effect, that you could make that mold out of, and make sure that you don't have any, you know, it would be a 2-part mold, or you could even do a 3-part mold as a practice. But the 2-part mold would definitely show you what I mean about the locking, you know, issue. So the only other thing I wanted to tell you before we get started with the other videos was to just let you know that understand that in the mold making process you're going to lose your sculpture, okay? And so you want to do everything in your power to make sure that that mold comes out 100%. You don't want to have to fix anything. You don't want to have to, you know, because once you get into repairing a mold, you know, especially before you've even gotten a pull, you know, you're not going to get 100% product. So plan it out, you know, do the drawings, you know, do it a couple of times, you know, take a few days and come back to it and see if there was something that you overlooked.